Down. So, greetings, everyone. Peace be upon you all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Absolutely thrilled in this series on leadership encounters of lead integrity to have with us Ms. Sumreen Ahmad, whom I will introduce in very, very briefly in a second. But I just wanted to revisit what lead integrity is. We are a group of faith-inspired, women-led, but by no means women-centered, women-led global consultancy. We're the first such enterprise to emerge on the horizon of an otherwise extraordinarily populated consultancy space globally. So we're the first faith-inspired, women-driven, and absolutely obviously global. Our partners come from all over the globe, literally. Our areas of expertise tend to be pretty much everything from rocket science to teaching sociology and society and religion in schools. It's everything that such amazing and accomplished experts from different parts of the world bring to the table. Largely, I would say we work on so many different fields under the general theme of sustainable development, under human rights, and democracy, obviously, very much under peace and security. The same three pillars of the United Nations system we have the experts, decades of expertise on. I tried once to calculate how much altogether the expertise is, and I realized the figure was it's just ridiculous. So we have a lot of expertise from within our respective professionals. Each one of them, there's really two things that bring this otherwise very varied tapestries of rich faith-inspired professionalism together. And that is one, that we're all faith-inspired, but hey, different faiths, absolutely different faiths from everything you know and plenty that you probably don't know. And we're incredibly, intensely, deliberately, and mindfully committed to integrity of leadership and competent leadership. We each, of course, bring different forms of it and manifestations of it in our respective work areas, but we're deeply committed to those two. And we share a common belief that competent leadership that defines integrity and is defined by integrity is something that we can all do with in our present time. And hopefully we'll be able, through our various encounters, like the one we have today, to celebrate competent leadership and integrity in so many different faith-inspired individuals. So it's the story of the person, it's also the stories of the professions. And to that end, we're absolutely delighted to have Sumreen Ahmad with us today. I met Sumreen, I think, a little over 2 weeks ago, I believe, and it was in a fantastic Tannenbaum event that was held in New York. And Sumreen, I give you a fair warning, is one of those people who you will never tire of listening to her and engaging with her. There is so much wisdom. And the first thing that struck me as I engaged with her was that this is not something only I should be the very delightful recipient of, but this is something that all of us need to see and to hear. And like a trend that I think we're all seeing, and many of us are part of as well, there's one foot in the corporate world, a very competent foot in a very big part of the corporate world. There's another couple of feet, because she has many, which are in the giving voluntarily of time, vision, effort, and wisdom. And we all appreciate that because those are the backgrounds that we come from, where even in lead integrity, we're committed to a certain part of our time being devoted to pro bono service to those who need it. And so, Sumreen, we're absolutely delighted to have you with us. When you and I first, you kindly agreed to do this, this encounter, we were not sure what was going to happen in the US elections. Right. But we were already speaking about a polarized context. Sadly, I don't think that polarization is going away. And in fact, perhaps now we may be in our different ways sensing it even more, and we can't hide from it anymore. And so the question to you as a Muslim woman, and we know how much, and I speak as a fellow Muslim woman, how difficult it is to be a Muslim in today's world, even in the predominantly Muslim world, it is difficult to be a Muslim woman of competence in those spaces, but there are different sets of challenges and opportunities when one is facing the pushback to being Muslim woman, um, professional, competent, etc. Um, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, because I can wax lyrical about you for quite some time, but that's not the point. The point is you tell us a little bit about who is Sumreen Ahmad, what makes you do what you do, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm humbled because the privilege of being able to pay forward my own experience is one that I don't take for granted. And so if there's even a sliver of benefit that comes from this conversation to somebody else, it is a blessing and a gift for me. So thank you for the opportunity. And I'm so grateful to be here. I also think this topic is so near and dear to my heart because when I look back on not just my personal, but my professional journey, things start to make sense in hindsight. And conversations like this actually allow me the opportunity to reflect a little bit. So, and I cannot give credit. I cannot move forward with this conversation without giving credit where credit is due. I'll start kind of from the beginning, right? And I will spare you, it won't be too long, but I was raised by very hardworking immigrant parents who left everything from Pakistan to immigrate to Canada. And from the get-go, it was a life of service, civic engagement, community. And woven through that was really faith and family at the forefront. But there was a sense of empowerment that came from that, just in terms of it's not just about your self-actualization, but always about what we would do for others. And so I had lessons of integrity in leadership before I even knew to call it that. And I would say that, and these are faith inspired and yet prevalent across humanity in general, is grounded in those lessons were really about humility was a strength, it's not a weakness. Empathy is the basis for any form of connection, right? Gratitude and patience, even when one is being tested to the fullest, is foundational to having perspective. And then I think about kind of the faith tenets about just having this heightened consciousness about being aware of those around you, who, particularly those who have less than you. But coupled with that emotional intelligence around, meeting people where they're at, and then ultimately, putting its ego in its place and really having a personal accountability to just that was the starting and ending point for even if you were going to influence anything, let alone influence anyone else. And so governing oneself, right? We have an obligation to one another. And, I have incredible parents who really just drilled into me that everything starts and ends with dignity. And it is the most powerful way to connect with somebody once you understand that, right? And in that was that leadership, as I grew and I was a very ambitious youth and I wanted to do everything and check all the boxes, was never going to be about titles or power or authority. And I can tell you that 26 years ago, almost to the day, when I got an acceptance letter to work in corporate, my father said to me literally that, no matter, he understood my ambition better than anyone. He said, no matter what you do, what they call you, how much they pay you, if you are not serving humanity, your mom and I don't want to know about it. And it wasn't told in harsh terms as much as it was just setting the expectation for my purpose beyond anything material or monetary from that standpoint. And let me tell you, there's easier ways to do that. I could have gone into the nonprofit world right away from the beginning, but that expectation has sat with me to this day. And I, to this day, ask him if I still have done it. Long story short there, I entered a corporate career, was very ambitious, climbed the ladder, did all of that. And then life happens. Life happens when you're tested in ways that you can't plan. I was introduced, I had young babies at the time. And having been raised with a life of service and community give back, I also had that burning urge to give the same to my children. But I was introduced to a woman by the name of Najah Bazi, who is the CEO and founder of a humanitarian organization that she was running from the back of her car back in 2009. And I was going through my own trials and I was trying to find safe space for myself, to let my kids be in good company. Um, and she has a knack for spotting talent. And the first thing she asked was, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a strategist." And therein began the beginning of a very fruitful relationship. So for the first decade of my career, I was really building skills in a very professional organization to understand holistic systems and how to operate. And then I will say, I don't, nothing is by coincidence. My faith teachings are that she came to me at a time where I needed most, to be able to begin the part of my career where I understood the wealth and worth of all of the skills that I had acquired and how I was going to translate back to the community. My motivation was that I wanted to foster an environment for my children to grow up in a life of service. And the benefit was actually that I, to this day, get more than I give when I'm able to cross both worlds. And that relationship has been fruitful for the last 15, 16 years of being able to really understand the intersection, the wisdom of what comes from the professionalism that is corporate and the metrics and how to measure, et cetera. But more importantly, how to really drive change in a way that's going to matter to the world. And so that's a little bit of my background, very heavily influenced by both faith and family, but shaped by the corporate lessons of how to really drive change.
Brilliant. I think now some of my colleagues on the call will understand why there was really no need for a scripted set of questions. Um, it actually wouldn't have worked very well because Sumreen covers the realm of everything in her ordinary conversation. And that's one of the things that I thought was absolutely amazing. And I do want to invite my colleagues to also raise questions if they have an opportunity. And so there's a direct engagement because we actually have a relatively small group. We can harvest that. One of the things, Sumreen, that you said that struck me was I remember from my own experience when I moved from the UN to a not-for-profit here in the United States. Um, and I was moving back from because I've been in that not-for-profit. I went to the UN and I came back to that same organization. And one of the things I was talking about is trying to ramp up the professionalism of the crew and of the image that we projected. And I remember it being so deeply injurious to the staff that what do you mean? I mean, we're very professional already. And I thought, okay, I'm taking something for granted in terms of what I understand about professionalism, having worked in the United Nations system, and what seems to be an understanding of professionalism that is more perhaps local to this community. And I wondered if you could engage with that a bit, because you've also said about being, obviously service, but also this note or notion of professionalism. What does that mean to you in your corporate service? And is it any different or is it the same in the not-for-profit service?
It is not, it's applicable and transferable, is what I would say, when you understand it. So, for context, my professional expertise really is around large scale culture transformations. I work in a global environment, and that means factoring in 120 different countries, cultural competencies anytime. So, when you're in a space and place that is about driving change and driving sustainable change, not just plug and play and leave, it's a path of managed change and growth. And when I think about the nonprofit world, often, and for benefit, it is led by people who are such incredible visionaries and want to get the job done. And so I won't sugarcoat that Najat and I, the founder CEO, butt heads quite a bit initially in our interactions, because when you're a visionary and you want to get things done right away, I was coming at it from an organizational maturity, and that for a nonprofit to really make sure that you were pouring the cement and that it was dry before you started putting layers on top of it. And I can tell you that we have accomplished everything and then some of what she wanted to accomplish, not necessarily in the time frame. And so as I worked to lead the strategy for this organization, helping, and she had already taken it out of the back of her car, but to move it from $100,000 organization to one that's just about 5 million in a very managed way to still preserve and protect the culture of the organic vision, with what is required to make sure that this organization is there long after we're gone. And I think, again, from a faith perspective, This is not about me. This is knowing that we're going to build something that is here to last. And so I forced a very managed approach. And in that process, made sure that um, it would be there in a sustained way. And so when I say that, I'll give you a very tactical example of when you start a nonprofit and just having basic organizational structure and governance and policies written down and all of the stuff that's back office and not so sexy when we think about what it means to implement a mission and a vision and a very human cause, spending the 3 to 5 years of really establishing the governance and all of the procedures and how we hire and fire and making sure that the culture of the organization is preserved required that we were actually making the investments in time and in resources to do that before we could go and open a health clinic, right? Because the quicker you plug things in, often the quicker they fall apart. And so I was very intentional. When I say about professionalism, it was making sure that things were done in the right order at the right time with the right investment of resources, with the intent that it would be there 20, 30, 50, 100 years long after we were gone. So just intentional managed growth of a nonprofit that I would apply if I was working with a corporate client, for example. And it's an integrity point. It very much lies in, being able to deliver what you want to in a very methodical, intentional way.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And I think it's that the concrete example, helpfulness,
Yeah.
and explaining the dissonance between how you would see it from a strategic direction and how it gets perceived from someone who set up everything with blood, sweat, and tears and has a magnificent, vision. To realize that, and has an urgency, a sense of urgency, because what you do, and maybe you can speak a little bit to that, both from your corporate standpoint as well as the Zaman standpoint, is it's that humanitarian engagement, the giving in dire circumstance. We're not talking about general developmental support. We're talking about reacting to and perhaps even preparing for very difficult contexts which require an immediate set of support, the humanitarian imperative, so to speak. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about you as Sumreen Ahmad in your corporate world, thinking and serving, if relevant, the humanitarian work.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
from Zaman, thinking and
Well,
serving.
and there's something about we all, when you start and end with dignity and human dignity and a right to live with dignity, that will mean different things depending on what allotment and what place you've been granted in this world. And that means something very different for somebody who's scraping by, living below poverty, might be in a war zone, for example, to somebody who is perhaps in the top 5%, right? That ability to unlock someone's potential, their starting point is definitely different. And so I am a firm believer in when given the right environment and conditions, we have the ability to really unlock and unleash individual potential when given the right conditions. And that applies in a corporate setting, and that applies in the community. So Zaman International is a wraparound humanitarian organization that provides services to mothers and children, women and children who live below poverty. The goal for these women was to be able to break the cycle of poverty so that generational poverty we could end that generational poverty. We start with very acute situations, often women who are coming out of abuse situations, who have nothing, who have mouths to feed. More often than not, refugees. English is not their first language, let alone their second or third language. Very dire situations. And yet I would still apply the same principles that I've learned in developing my corporate teams to be able to lift and drop that in an environment, to make sure, the difference being that, I could use Maslow's hierarchy of needs for someone who's in that condition to first assess, do they even have basic safety and shelter and air and, place? And to be able to build from that. And so to be able to apply the same principles, but in different conditions, yet realize that person has a right to self-actualization the same way that somebody else in another part who has more would be striving for that too. So apply the same rules with a different methodology of how we get them there. The challenging circumstances that someone might be facing are obstacles that we have to deal with. I like dealing with them in a both individual way recognizing that I want to treat those as an exception while building the systemic solutions around that. So while we can take a woman who's in a dire situation, a client, and bring her in and be able to give her acute services, food, shelter, et cetera, the end state for that person is be able to see them through that journey and do it in a way that is in line with their ability, their potential, that aligns to their circumstances. And again, that comes with the vision is there. It's the approach and how you're going to take them there. So I feel like the premise of knowing that we're solving for humanity and we can leverage the teachings of my corporate experience to be able to give back in a way to, on a very human level, to be able to take someone through that journey. It's very humbling actually, because there are many times that I have my foot in both worlds, and I struggle sometimes of just wanting to jump and just focus on one or jump and focus on the other. But I realize that there's such an intersection between the two that we cannot, the way the world is going, we cannot decouple them. Both are necessary.
On that note, bear with this question, because not all of us understand what that corporate world could represent and is representing, and or intersecting, how it intersects with the not-for-profit. Maybe just as if you would have to explain to a very young person, give us a bit of your take on how being in this corporate world, even an example, whatever is easier for you, yeah, how there is an intersection. And let's see if it's possible to do it in the humanitarian space, but anything, frankly, anything, strategic vision, whatever.
Yeah.
Where do they intersect, Sumreen, and how? And in your own experience, what is the value added of that?
I think the ability to see things in terms of systems is an important one. And organizations, mature organizations, and the privilege of working with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies is that they are not sustainable if they're not built upon systems, long-lasting systems. So your HR function, for example, how you market, how you take your product to market, those are systems. They're not reliant on individuals when done right. They are replicable, they're scalable, you can grow your company to go into a different geography, et cetera. They're systems, right? They're sustainable systems. Oftentimes when we get into the nonprofit world, and I don't want to generalize because some do it better than others, we think about it in terms of this one individual. If Azza goes away, the company goes away. And we're not necessarily thinking about things often in systems. And so we can give a woman a meal for the evening and clothes for her children to get her through a dire situation. What happens when the denominator goes from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to where we're seeing deep needs now, where the social structures are not providing in the way that we need them to, and we're having to treat or address these populations? Further and further, more people are slipping below poverty. If I treat everything as kind of the exception, then I'm not going to be able to solve for this on a large scale. So the ability to look at a problem, look at it holistically in terms of how it fits into what are the root causes against that situation, because certainly that woman is not alone in her trial. There are so many others. And to be able to address it from a systemic lens and put in solutions that then get ahead of the problem and proactively mitigate the risks for other women to not fall under that same situation. So understanding there's always going to be exceptions, right? There will be situations that fall outside, but the ability for me to think of Zaman 20, 50, 60 years from now, for example, is to know that I've built systems that are long-term and sustainable. That is a corporate training that I've achieved, because in large scale organizations, people come and go. We cannot afford to be reliant on an individual. There may be inspirational CEOs out there that really create a culture and a tone. But even with that, these companies are going to outlast the people that are running them. So I think the ability to look at systems, and I'll give you another example, is connecting the dots in the ecosystem. Companies don't always have to take everything on, and they understand efficient use of resources. right? It's a bottom line, especially if you're a public company and you have to respond to your shareholders. You're not going to try and reinvent the wheel every single time a problem comes up. You'll probably find partners in the ecosystem to help solve for them. That is something that is very transferable into the nonprofit world.
Mm.
We don't need 10 nonprofits in a single city trying to solve for the same thing. What we need is quality over quantity. And what we can do is then allow people to lean into what their strengths are as an organization and create an ecosystem to collaborate with. That is something that I've learned from a corporate world, that again, we can actually take that and allow our nonprofits to be able to scale and make more impact, make huge impact in the ways that matter most. Because I think about the world and systems and ecosystems and partners and how do we collaborate as opposed to reinvent and be kind of person centric as opposed to kind of system centric. So
That's brilliant.
without taking away the mission of the organization, there's still such a human side of the humanitarian world. You're never going to replace the human side of it, but you can find ways to be able to scale and replicate.
It's amazing. You've just helped me understand something that really had been bugging me for a few years when I served in the not-for-profit. And it's that very brilliant explanation you gave to setting up a system. And I'm sure that James and Barry and Grove will all also hear it from their respective experiences. The difference between setting up a system that's going to function regardless of who is occupying the different positions of authority or service, and keeping it in a way that's much more responsive to the individual happens to be in that space or position. Those are two completely different things. And that's exactly what I meant when I was saying we need to professionalize. And what I should have perhaps used so that people wouldn't get so upset with me is maybe we just need to create systems that are sustainable beyond the individuals in this space so that they can not only continue to serve, but even enhance and serve more and better. And I think you've put it brilliantly, Sumreen, and you've helped me understand something that was really not clear, even to myself, for quite some time. And I'm very grateful to you for that. I hope my colleagues on the call can see how incredibly, I don't know, how much wisdom there is in this conversation alone. And I know that some of us are already thinking, how can we get her to help us with our own integrity's own, visioning and strategy, frankly. And I think it's extremely helpful. One of the things you mentioned, Samreen, and thank you for the very concrete examples. There is a tension within the not-for-profit world that is about the person who leads the institution. Most nonprofits around the world are actually really, really around the individual who envisioned and created, or the couple who envisioned and create. Most nonprofits are like that. And I think in your own experience, and you don't have to speak to the individuality of Zaman International, but really more from how you see it from 30,000 feet corporate world serving 780,000 staff, to when you see it from that perspective and you see the way that, shall we say, not-for-profits or NGOs are so personalized, they're so driven by the character and the personality, such that it's actually extremely challenging to try to change towards a more generic system base, for lack of a better word, that would not be personal to the individual. So that, because the individual personalization, of course, has tremendous benefit, of course, but it also can be extraordinarily disabling when there's another person trying to lead your institution. It can be disabling because this person is not that person, and this is all about that person. What kind of advice would you give to a lot of not-for-profits who are struggling with this kind of the intimate personalization of a mission of an NGO or a not-for-profit? What kind of advice would you give generally?
I'll give the example that I've grown up watching and been privileged with, and I'm blessed with a mentor, and really has been a spiritual even example. The first is, Islamically, everything starts with intention. And so Najah had taken the book by Jim Collins and said Built to Last, which is a famous management theory book, and actually reframed it under the banner of Built to Leave. And so from the beginning, The intention is that we do not know when we're going to take our next breath, our last breath. And so to build something around just the individual is actually a disservice to even your own vision. We do not have the privilege of knowing how long we will be here. So starting first and foremost with the intention that this is something that's built to leave behind long after any of us are here. The second is probably my corporate, probably call it, strength or frustration for those around me, is to look at things through the lens of risk management. And so, building on the first point, we don't know how long we are on this earth. What are we doing to ensure that there's succession planning? And so succession planning, again, what is it that you can't have success? Success is part of succession planning, even just in the way that you write the word. And so we should always be thinking about the next generation of leaders as we build this. And so the risk management side of this is understanding what's coming around the corner, being ahead of it, and planning for it, right? Knowing that we're not going to be around. So that's the second point of wisdom. And that applies no matter what. That applies in our family situation. That applies everywhere. Is that always to just make sure that we're being intentional about planning. And then the third, actually, when you extrapolate to say, who am I building for the next generation, becomes a culture point for the organization itself. And so if your intent is to grow your impact and as a byproduct, grow the organization, in doing so, we now have 75 full-time employees at Zaman, starting with it's incredible. But when you start with that intention that this is something that we are leaving behind, you become more intentional about what it is that you're passing along. And so that starts from the board to the staff to the volunteers, of knowing that when that person is gone, that this will still remain. And so it does start from the top, and it does. And founder syndrome is a real risk that comes with nonprofits. It is a reality of it, but always being aware of that risk and being able to put in the structures and the systems around it, because all of a sudden that founder doesn't have to be in the weeds of the day-to-day decision making, because you can uplift them and create more impact for what they need to go do when you build those systems below. And it becomes less threatening that you're taking something away from the founder, if in fact that is the risk, or even the burden of responsibility that might be on that founder to be the only person who's going to still carry the load forward. So it really is about, it's not about any one individual, it's about the mission, but how do we make sure that it's a win-win for both the founder and the organization, and more importantly, the people that you're serving?
And that's the question. Ain't that the $1,000,000 question?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Listen, so I have plenty more questions to ask you, but I also, there's one burning question that I cannot not ask you. And I've been good because I've been trying to keep it to the generic and the issues and the corporate and the this and that. Hella, you're a Muslim woman in the United States of America. We've just had an election that has been instructive, very, for lack of a better word. You've already spent a long career in building bridges between dissonances and between different kinds of ways of life and service. What would you describe as the skills you have that have served you to serve in those different spaces during some very, very polarized times? And what are the skills you feel you're going to need to rely on now to continue to build the social cohesion that you are so committed to professionally, but also as a Muslim woman in America?
I'll start with the fundamental principle that my faith has the answers to solve for humanity. That understanding, it's just deeply inherent in me. It's something that I'm reminded all the time. And so that gives both a sense of hope of knowing that there are answers to some of the world's greatest problems, whether it be climate change, poverty, etc. It also gives you a huge burden of responsibility to fulfill on that and to do your part and to set the intention. And so my two greatest strengths, I would say, is understanding the pivotal role of relationship building, even when it is across divides, especially when it is across divides. And in order to make sure that I'm leaning into that strength, because all things start and end with your relationships, right? In terms of your ability to even influence and be challenged and to be able to take that wisdom and do something with it. is emotional intelligence, right? Knowing your place in a conversation, knowing your audience, understanding where they're at to meet them where they're at. And I could have the same topic and have four different conversations, four different people, depending on the vantage point in which they're coming from. But that comes back to the relationship and my desire to be able to build a strong foundation such that we may be able to honor our differences with respect and still be able to achieve the same end goal. But it's a relationship point. But in order to be effective in your relationships, you also have to understand your own strengths and limitations as well as the people around you.
And forgive me, but on that point, I think one of the things that many of us are struggling with, at least I should say I am struggling with as an Arab Muslim woman in this hemisphere. By the way, I struggle with it also back in my own hemisphere where I was brought up. So it's not just like, but let's just say that it's a little bit more nuanced here in the times we're living in. There is a certain sense of entitlement that some people have, many people have. So when you talk about, very wisely, knowing your place in a relationship building exercise, which is foundational to everything you need to do in building bridges and social cohesion, when you talk about knowing your place, how have you dealt with those who would wish to put you and who see you in a specific place that is distinct from their own because their sense of privilege makes them feel entitled to the greatness that you should not, cannot, and obviously must not and could not have? So how have you dealt with those kinds of, you still need to build a relationship, especially as you said, when things are like this. But how do you deal with that? Obviously think of me and my colleagues, but also think of those younger who value the same faith system that we all grow up with. And anyone who adheres to a faith system, who's a believer in anything, understands that humility underpins everything in terms of relationship building. But not everyone appreciates that. And some see humility as a weakness and, they don't have time for you. So that sense of privilege that certain people have, especially people with influence, political, financial, and otherwise, how do you recommend, advise, especially the younger women, women of faith from different faith traditions, but what would you recommend as some of the strategies or ways of thinking or strengths that you would say, you know what, when you come across this, here's what I would advise you to do, or here's how I've dealt with it?
It's funny that you say humility because I would say that this work starts from within, right? Be able to even make these kinds of change or be part of influence, it's heart work that really comes down to digging deep within myself. And I find that, this last year has been a perfect example of that. The more I find myself in those moments of confrontation, for example, or, the more I actually have to be intentional about retreating and digging deep within myself also to understand, because in many ways, there's an equal sense of entitlement that somehow you're just going to change somebody who is they're a product of their own lived experiences. Right. And so when I step back from those moments and dig deep and do my own work, I often find that I probably am not going to come in and change someone's mind by course of a discussion. We are all products of our lived experiences. And I didn't have the privilege necessarily to be able to be in the company of some of these people to understand their lived experiences for when they come and they might be demonstrating a type of entitlement. But there's also something to be said about the path of patience and perseverance and tenacity. And to expect someone to change their mind or accept me for who I am in an immediate moment is a bit of, I will say, even entitled for me to think. And so when I go back to relationships at the core of this, not everyone can do it. I have personally committed to working with people who will hold a completely opposite, polarized, and in some cases, even insulting point of view that is a direct attack on me. Mm. In doing so, and not always, there creates almost a safety in that dialogue. It's been an interesting journey to make someone first understand that we may have very different beliefs on a certain topic. But that if you're in a situation where you have to work with them, we still have to work together.
Mm.
And so the organizational guardrails may be that we still have to come to some working arrangement.
Mm.
But in creating a bit of a safe environment and modeling what it means to actually be empathetic and compassionate and recognize that they're coming at me with their own lived experiences and their beliefs, perhaps our interactions may foster some new lived experiences, perhaps. And I have seen in the last year alone people come and say, I feel really stupid asking this question, right? But you, but you know, can you not judge me in this? And I have watched people where the light bulb has gone on over the course of 3, 6, 9 months, 2 years. And it's because I've allowed for space to be created, but it takes a heavy investment in time. And I can tell you, there's a lot of growth, personal growth that comes with that too, to understand my own upper limits on this.
Mm.
But I really believe that you don't just get to decide you're going to have a relationship and make influence. There's an investment that's required. And I may not even see it in my own lifetime, right? And understanding that, and again, from a faith perspective, I strive, I do my part, I have good intention, but I leave the outcome to God. And if there's even a sliver of influence that I've made in this person, then I'm privileged for that. And if I don't, then it doesn't take away from my intention. And so I think I check myself before I expect outcomes, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Sumreen. Oh my gosh, plenty to I think James has an expression I just learned about today, which is drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah.
I'm really feeling that right now. It's like I'm just it's so much wisdom and really pure. It's water. Thank you. Um, I just want to give an opportunity to my distinguished colleagues to also engage with you on some of what you've raised, and I know that uh, Grove has quite a treasure trove of issues that she works with, and she may well want to share it. Grove, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, please, and thank you. Sumreen, it's lovely to hear you. I spent some time studying at Harvard Business School as well as Harvard Divinity School, so I understand the fruitful juxtaposition. So I wanted to ask you, when I think about my work trying to motivate amongst an interfaith and faith-based group of advocates at the UN and thinking about civil society trying to have influence at the UN, I've found myself starting to say, actually, it's about less of us going and being able to be more strategically representative of each other. And I do think that the profit motive and the idea of having to be visible so that, you know, my particular organization or piece is seen, heard, lifted up is something that fits into the picture of what you're talking about, when in fact I think we want to model towards the end of growth. One of the cities I live in is Jersey City, and they are getting down to understanding that there is enough food here for everybody. And I don't see that built in. It's always a model of growth, 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 but we need to have some degrowth. And then just to ask you to do another slice on that, my experience around technology is it changes our methods of communication and our methods of work in ways that those of us who've been around the block a lot tend to find annoying.
Mm.
And those of us who've not been around the block tend to find absolutely essential. But it really impacts our work environment and the competence and the perceived competence that we bring to the table. So I wondered if that set of issues gives you some meat to think with me.
Yeah. So again, corporate, which takes up a lot of my mind share on any given day. Look, extremes breed extremes. And I think we're seeing a lot of the effects of late stage capitalism. But what's fascinating about it in my world is that we have 6 generations in the workforce right now, which is unprecedented. So you have everyone from the traditionalists, right? So in some cases 75 years above, and you have Gen Alpha, which is the newest set of graduates that are coming in. Um, and to navigate the difference in how they see work, how they see relationships, how they engage with technology, it is so nuanced, but it also each brings its own goodness. And so if I have to put a team together in a room that spans all 6 generations, and then you throw up geocultural differences, ideological differences in that conversation, there's a new breed of leadership that's emerging here that actually is forcing us to move away from traditional what deems success into new ways of thinking about how do people find their purpose, how do you drive productivity, how do you increase engagement, all of those things. And the burden of responsibility I feel like I have as a business leader is that I have been a privileged position to be able to kind of empower individuals in the communities I serve. And if I just limited it to the lane of the corporate world, it would be a disservice to myself, but also to the communities. And so I think when I think about interaction with technology or growth versus degrowth, or what do we really need? Like, are we operating from a scarcity mindset versus actually one that is growth and to do greater good? I couldn't function if I didn't have my feet in both worlds, because when I start to feel that we're drowning in all this discussion about AI and what artificial intelligence is going to do, all I have to do is step foot in the Zaman Center headquarters and see what real people with real issues and real, like, in terms of how they're interacting, and it grounds me, because there's not everyone is being confronted with these things about technology, et cetera, because a lot of people don't even have access to some of what we have access to. And so for me, it's a forced humility to make sure that I am engaging across all the different stakeholders, all the different populations, to make sure that when I speak to or see or internalize solutions that are going to be sustainable for the world, I'm factoring all of those in, because we do know that there is going to come an end to this extreme of greed for kind of the 1% of the world to be able to. I mean, we have to start thinking, if we aren't already, truly solutioning for what comes next. And I will tell you, and I have, again, 5 kids between 17 and 23. They are perfect sounding board for me to kind of check myself around what matters, right? What's going to matter? We're leaving them a world, and I feel horrible for the world we're leaving. And so how are they going to be part of the solution? So rather than say that they're always on their phones and they're never engaged and everything, the reality is that I sometimes think that they might have the solutions for this better than we do, right? And I want to lean into that and understand that we need to understand the strength that comes from all of the people around us, including those that are probably the most marginalized, to be able to help us solve for these problems.
Wow. Sorry. Grove, it was your questions. I just couldn't help the comments slip through. Did you say 17 to 23?
Yeah.
Yes. I remember. I was one of the things I told Sumreen was she's one of those child brides that UNFPA, I used to work for them, used to advocate against. Clearly, an incredible legacy, and very, very interesting to hear your take, if I may, on, instead of complaining about how disassociated or disconnected and connected in different ways our young generations are, that it might actually be helpful to actually see if we can learn from them. And
Oh,
maybe on that note, I just wanted to see if I know James was just talking about his own troop. Uh, James, did you want to maybe just share something from your own experience also about where, I mean, you've trained generations of folks, including younger people, in very difficult circumstances in indigenous and other contexts. Do you want to maybe just ask something or share something?
Yeah, I mean, just on that last point, um, one of the things that I see all the time and struggle against is the idea of inclusion, whether it be 1325, whether it be the voices of youth. The language of that is always around, we need to bring them in to understand what we have to say. I find that so painful to hear, because let's get the young people in the room to hear the wisdom of the elders versus, let's equalize the sharing of experience and wisdom across experience. So I mean, I'm very grateful that you bring that up, Azza. Also, I mean, you really did capture. I mean, I don't know where to go with this, Sumreen. Thank goodness we're recording this because I have to listen to the whole thing about 6 more times just to capture not only the wisdom, but wow, what a great capacity you have to turn phrases as well. Not just articulation of ideas, but the poetic articulation of ideas that I always find breaks us out of the kind of what we assume words mean, right? And you put in different phraseology for ideas we think we understand, and it breaks open that paradigm and gives us new understanding. So thank you so much for that. So I'm struggling to think, my goodness, she preempted all of my questions here, and better than I could have formulated them. But what I am left with maybe is just a bit of personal struggle. The big problems, which I've had maybe the unfortunate experience of struggling with over my career, the big problems seem to just be getting bigger to the point where myself and others, I think, are feeling overwhelmed, even to the point of despair. I think we had found ourselves in a position maybe 15 years ago where we felt like the global consensus was helping us. Of course, we're moving towards a rights-based kind of model of law. Of course, we're moving towards pluralist social structures. Of course, we're moving towards representative democracy. And I think we've been really put back on our heels to realize, wait a minute, that is not something that everyone is agreeing with. And in fact, many folks are kind of actively discarding that framework. So the work I used to do and ended about 2 months ago, was very community based, and we were sort of like working those themes, but in communities around the world. And I think now going back to the idea, wow, we have these big problems we have to grapple with, has made me wonder, is my energy in the right place? And the one place I'm actually finding some hope, and you talked about, knowing where you are and being right sized, is in the communities. I mean, I think if anything is going to work against these tides that are kind of pushing back on what we thought were gains, the hope I find is people doing work locally, and the challenge of that, and Grove, you talked about a model of growth. I think that's true of NGOs as well. We're like, look for more grants, get bigger, get a bigger reach. But the challenge in that localization, where the hope actually is this question of systems approaches and coalitions and collaboration. I'm not even sure that's necessary, right? Because if people are doing good work where they are, it might just kind of organically be a broad collaborative systems approach. But if you don't mind unpacking a little bit, for me, who's just kind of exploring this idea, how that might, coordination is such a terrible word because no one wants to be coordinated, because that means someone, again, is governing. But how might those organic local efforts find a way to systematize in a way that they push back on these big voices and big mobilizers towards things that we're scared of, and I think rightfully so, and things that might move the entirety of humanity in the wrong direction?
It's a lot. And I hope nobody thinks I've got all the answers to these questions, because I'm just trying to do my best, like every one of you. I do want to honor your point about we don't need more heroes. We need millions of heroic acts, right? And there are a lot of good people doing a lot of great things. But first and foremost, I feel like we need to all kind of take ownership, and I think everyone on this call does, that we are the system. We are part of the system. We have an obligation to give back. We have to recognize that this isn't somebody else's problem to fix, right? And just understanding that, it just changes the way you think about this. And so if we're here to solve some of humanity's biggest problems, it's not a single hero, but it actually is a system of the people and the companies and, for-profit, nonprofit, public, government, the whole 9 yards. to be able to kind of rally around that single purpose. And while we may not be aligned on what that purpose really is because of individual vested interests, and I heard Asa speak about at a previous engagement around trust is built on kind of that vested interest. We have a problem of trust right now across the systems because there are so many individual interests at play. But I can either wallow in that and not do anything about it, or I can choose to step in and step out. And there's people who have strengths of being able to collaborate and find out where there's economies of scale to be achieved across the different organizations trying to do things. There are people who are really great at bringing them together. We've got to make sure that we're all able to lean into that strength, but it is a real disservice when we are not listening to the voices that go unheard. Because if we think we're going to solve for the problems and not include the folks that are most impacted, we're kidding ourselves. And so to be able to really open our ears to not the loudest voices, but the ones that more often go unheard, they have to be part of the solution without being made the responsible for the solution. We have an obligation. But again, that goes back to some of the humility point, recognizing that we're the system essentially, with every finger you point, there's 3 pointed back at you. And so taking that ownership. And I think that, again, doing the work from within and realizing that we all have something to offer. And it doesn't need to be some grandiose contribution as much as it's being a part of something greater than yourself. And we do live in a very individualistic, entitled society. And part of what I often need to do is surround myself with people who equally believe in that purpose of you are part of a greater whole, and to play that role. So I don't necessarily have a methodical answer to other than just realizing that we are part of we're part of the solution. And if we don't listen to the voices that go unheard, then we're not solutioning anything, really.
Brilliant. There's so much that we can continue to talk to you about and learn from you, Sumreen. And I think you've just, amongst the many pearls of wisdom you've shared, is this notion that it's not about the solutions, it's about the experiential lived wisdoms. And we're not, even though many of us think that we know how people are, we know what they think, we know what the problems are, the situations are, we've got the data, we've got the evidence. The truth is that the lived experience of every human counts for wisdom. And the ability to share that wisdom is definitely a skill. Not all of us can do it equally eloquently. But we have something to share. And that is also one of the many reasons why we're part of a system. We're part of a system because we're doing something and we've got something to say and learnings to share. And I think that's one of the things, the minimum that Lead Integrity aims to do is to try to begin to harvest some of those lived wisdoms from many different sectors. And some of my former colleagues are like, oh, but you need to interview big people, big names. I'm like, no, actually, we just need to interview ordinary human beings who are doing extraordinary things, because it's not, like you said it so beautifully, it's not having more heroes, but it's a lot more heroic work that needs to take place. And I think that's a nugget, one of the many nuggets that we can take with us of your particular experiential wisdom that is completely, it's very hard to argue with. And I would argue that many of us are already doing that. All of us actually are already doing that. I've learned so much from people we will never see their name on a book. We will never see them on a TV screen. We will never hear of them in our lived realities. They won't even be a small sign in a supermarket. We will simply never hear about them. And yet those are the people from whom we've learned so much and continue to learn so much. In your case, you're definitely not a sign on a supermarket. You're a big, bright, amazing, mashallah, light, I think, that's right out there. And I feel very, very grateful to you and deeply privileged to have had the opportunity to have you with us to teach and to share your wisdom. You're an incredible, inspiring human being. I should have taken your autograph when we met, but maybe one day we'll meet again and I'll take it again, inshallah. But generally, Sumreen, I think we're all incredibly proud to know you, to have had the opportunity to have a little bit of your time with us. It's actually quite a bit of your time with us. So we're deeply, deeply grateful to you. I hope that you will share the journey with Lead Integrity with us and continue to inspire and to teach and make demands, if and when it's possible, make demands You've got an incredible team of people around, and we'd be deeply honored for you to be one of our um, advisors, our partners in this space. We have so much to learn from you, and I think you've only just begun to teach. So you've got a good, wonderful career ahead of you. So thank you so much. And is there any parting wisdom you want to share, anything you want to leave us with?
I just want to build on the previous question because I think about what we're needing to be a part of is transformational change. And, that demands that each of our individual journeys is going to push beyond something. We have to believe that this is kind of not somebody else's problem, right? It's not hashtag activism, just elevating the dialogue. And I know that for me, it's coming from a place of I do believe that I want to take all of the wisdom I've learned by working with marginalized communities and those voices that go unheard to shift the needle, to reconstitute business practices, right? We have to develop the next breed of leadership that's going to inject consciousness and courage and compassion back into these systems, right? We have to fight the urge to polarize. And we're in this window right now where that is the natural divisiveness seems to be the starting point. It's in the water and the air that we breathe. And so we have to take that responsibility. I take that responsibility to fight that urge to polarize and really seek to understand one another in spite of our differences, right? And to just build this leadership that's actually honoring those that need it the most and that are really part of it. And that's how we're going to drive long-term transformational change. And I pray that I can do my part, but I'm also heartened to know that the likes of you all are part of that, because this is about far more than any one of our individual organizations. It's about the collective impact that we all have a responsibility to make, because leadership is about responsibility. It's not a right. And so to come into it. So I think I'm grateful for the privilege of being part of what I think is a transformational change. And the next generation is yearning for it. They're driven by something different. And I want to make sure that rather than come learn from me, we can learn from one another. And that's how we're going to solve for these. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On those words, there's nothing further to add except to give deep, deep gratitude to you, Sumreen, and to each and all of my colleagues who made the time to join. Sumreen, we know your time is precious. We know your wisdom is even more so. We are deeply grateful to you, and we look forward to continuing to learn from you and with you on the transformational leadership journey. May God bless you. Take good care, and to be continued. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.